Hi, my name is Mark Ryan. I'm going to just quickly run through the use case for using Nginx for browser-based access for Zscaler private access. So I'm not entirely sure if it's a bright idea, but through Zscaler private access with the Zscaler client connector, or indeed with browser-based access, the connector itself resolves and connects to the web server. So if the web server doesn't use any kind of SNIs for TLS or host headers as a multi-tenant hosted server, there won't be any issues with making it public through browser-based access. However, if the web server content contains an absolute URL or a redirect or embedded content, for example, it redirects to HTTPS web server / page, it's not fully qualified, or even worse, to an IP address, or it's expecting these host headers or whatever, then browser-based access, I wouldn't say it can't be used, but it will produce errors. You'll see content that wasn't available. The same is true if you're posting data, uploading data to the website, and some of those post URLs might be absolute or whatever. So you need to consider those, not just in the way the web server works, but in the way the content that's delivered from the web server and the embedded content there works. So concept. If we put Nginx in between the connector and the web server, Nginx can do the rewrite of the content and of the headers. Secondarily, you can actually install Nginx on the connector. Now, obviously, installing it on the connector is going to increase memory and processing on the connector. So we would need to think about additional capacity or whatever for that kind of content. So let's take a look at how that would work. We don't want that page. So a WordPress server here running in AWS. It's running on a private IP space, obviously, public IP space here. But for all intents and purposes, the URL is wordpress.welshgeek.net. And, I'm running the Zscaler client. This will simply resolve. Let's take a look at that. Ping Nginx wordpress.welshgeek.net. We'll get the 164 address, and we can curl http wordpress.welshgeek.net. We'll get the content back, or even https wordpress.welshgeek.net. Let's just go through here, and you can actually see. Oh, it's probably not running on HTTPS. But yeah, I hadn't fat fingered it. WordPress, and you can see if we look in here, result 164 1.2. We got the connection. The WordPress server was here, and we can see the content. And obviously in the browser. All looking good. What a fantastic website. So yeah, it's going to work through the full Zscaler client, but what about through browser-based access? Now, WordPress is kind of notorious for the things it wants to do, but let's imagine, for example, that my internal namespace is welshgeek.net. Externally, I am something else entirely. So let's go ahead and exit this. And so, for example, I could be word.intra externally. Doesn't really matter what it is. So what we can do is I've created a server, and the server I'm going to call WordPress, doesn't actually matter what it's called, and it's pointing to 127001. So every connector that this would be associated with would need to have Nginx running on it. And so the server group, WordPress, here points to the server, and it's associated with my AWS connector group. So with any time that application is accessed, it'll need to pass through that Nginx server. So let's go and have a look at this application segment. So create an application segment, and this is currently disabled, so it wasn't in use when I just did my test. We'll edit this. And what this is saying is WordPress.wellsgeek.net. It's going to connect, it's going to use port 80 and 443. If I want to make it browser-based access, it's going to be HTTP to the back end, but it really doesn't matter for this case. It could be HTTPS. Let's go ahead and enable this. So what will happen is the connector will make will try to access WordPress.wellsgeek.net. Instead of it going directly to the server and using DNS resolution, the server group is configured to use static server definitions, and it'll go to 127001, which is the Nginx server. And we'll do the same for this one, word.intra, exactly the same thing, except this one's using HTTPS at the back end. And we'll go ahead and enable that. So I now have two applications, word.intra, wordpress.wellsgeek.net, that are both going through the Nginx server. So let's take a look at what that looks like on the connector. So systemctl status, the ZPA connector. You can see that's running. Systemctl status Nginx, that's running. And I've got my two configuration files here, WordPress and Word. That's cat word.intra.conf. Now Word is the one that it's going to resolve and use different FQDNs external than is actually used internal. And WordPress or WordPress.net is where what I'm going to advertise externally matches the internal server. So in this one, it's running on SSL. I've got a certificate that my Nginx server's running on. Open SSL x59 in while.intra.crt. That's text. Tells me there's a certificate. We can see word.intra is the subject alternative name on the certificate. So we're going to take this stuff in, and it's going to rewrite, it's going to pass the content to wordpress.wellsgeek.net. So it's actually Nginx that's going to do the resolution. WordPress.wellsgeek.net. That's going to resolve to the real IP address of the server. And then what this is going to do is it's going to rewrite anything that's in the content that says WordPress.wellsgeek.net with word.intra. And then anything that was an HTTP redirect with an HTTPS redirect. So these subfilters are actually scanning the content that is returned from the original server. And the only other thing we need to do is set the host header. The host header says instead of it coming in as being word.intra, which is what Nginx received, it's going to add the host header wordpress.wellsgeek.net, because WordPress actually needs to see that host header. WordPress.wellsgeek.net as itself actually doesn't care. It's here I'm actually going to forward it specifically to the canonical name of the EC2 instance. The header is the header that's set is the same as the incoming header. It doesn't need to worry about anything else. And we're just going to do some rewriting again for whatever's WordPress to set those headers and the same HTTP HTTPS filters. So that should all work. So what does that look like from the client side? Now obviously word.intra is not something I can put in into DNS. So if I go cat etc resolve.conf, hosts. What I actually want to do is sudo vi etc hosts. So now it's going to point at the exporter directly. If I dig WordPress.welshgeek.net, so WordPress is actually going direct. I don't want that, so I'll need to I'll use host files just because it saves me updating all my DNS and everything. So ping WordPress.welshgeek.net. It's resolving to that. The exporter if we look at these browser accesses, here's my WordPress. And you can see that these IP addresses 35.179.6.254 is what I've configured for those host entries. So I've just used a host entry to point directly at the exporter function for Zscaler private access. So now if I go to https word.intra, we watch what's going on. I'm now able to access it through browser-based access directly. If we were to do a header trace, let's open up Safari instead. What we'll do, open a private browser session, https word.intra. We'll keep the web inspector going so you can see what's kind of going on there. You can see, let's get rid of that actually. Browser-based access wants me to enter some details, emran@welshgeek.net. This will SAML SP, it's taken me to my ADFS server and authenticated me. And now I can get to word.intra and see the content. All well and good. And anyone who's familiar with WordPress, it really doesn't like any kind of content if you're accessing it incorrectly by a different FQDN. And this is what Nginx is taking care of for us. HTTPS wordpress.welshgeek.net. We'll see the similar kind of. I didn't like that. So we need to have a look at my configuration. There, it's hit WordPress welshgeek.net. And it didn't like that bit. So obviously it still needs a little bit of work. Let's take a look at the diagnostics. And in each of these, for example, here's the word.intra coming in. We can see that it connected 127.0.0.1 port 443 for that request. So it actually hit the connector itself. So we can go off and we can figure out the rest of that configuration and take it from there. Hope this is useful.